Welcome back to Carrying the Fire, Indigenous Women Restoring the Land, a special 3-part Get FireSmart Podcast series. This is episode 3. Today, we're listening to Samantha Draney, a proud member of the Skeetchestn Indian Band. Wildfire seasons changed her work and her why. In burned areas, she found medicines like Arnica returning, setting the stage for a story about healing a relationship with fire and helping a community do the same. It's a story that shows us what it means to burn, not with destruction, but with purpose.
I'm Jaci Gilbert. I work for FNESS as a cultural and prescribed fire specialist, and we are recording a Get FireSmart podcast with Samantha Draney.
I'm Samantha Draney. I'm a Skeetchestn Indian Band member. Also worked with Skeetchestn Natural Resources for about 13 to 14 years. In that time, I've done almost everything here, archaeology, cultural heritage, but also worked all the major fires in the territory since I've been here. I also help out the cultural burning within the community boundaries.
Can you share a bit about how you became involved in the cultural burning?
It was just out of watching my brothers get to go out and burn hay fields, properties on the reserve. My uncles burned all the time in the spring when I was growing up. So it honestly was more like I was scared of it when I was younger. Then I hit preteens and I was interested in it. And then as a teenager, I just jumped out with my brothers one day, showed up with my own burning rake, and they gave me a lighter. And it was just kind of on from there. We always burned our hay fields so that there was better pasture for the horses. And then that's kind of moving more into wanting to learn more about doing cultural burns for plant management for our First Nations plants of interest. And it just keeps growing and growing from there. I really have a good relationship with fire at this point in my life, from where it all started being terrified with the valley filled with smoke in the springtime.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear that you and your family were able to keep burning and expanding your knowledge throughout your life. Were you ever learning about the cultural side of burning when you were burning the hayfields?
Not as much back then. Like I said, we were just burning for rangeland, basically. We've always had horses and cattle growing up, so it'd be burning to knock back probably some of the plants we consider culturally significant now, to improve grass or get rid of weeds. But just with being in cultural heritage for the past 11 years or so and really working with medicinal plants and understanding how fire plays a role in that succession, I've taken it just kind of onto myself to start learning. I don't have any grandfathers. They all passed away before I was born, but my remaining grandmother actually has lost that traditional knowledge due to residential school. And she only has very few memories of cultural burning, but the memory she does have is of women leading it. So that kind of made me even more interested in it, because I feel like it's our role to be out and take care of the land that way.
That's really powerful how you learned that from your grandmother, and now here you are, a woman trying to revitalize it. You talked about how residential school has impacted your grandmother's ability to remember and learn about cultural burning. Can you talk more about how colonization has affected fire use where you're from?
Well, just that loss of knowledge from the older generation, there's kind of like a wall where residential happened, and we seem to become really disconnected and scared of the culture. Then there's also Smokey the Bear that made fire a bad thing for almost everyone, and it was a scary thing. We didn't understand that we needed it. And also, in today's day and age, we're restricted by boundaries still. Boundaries aren't just fence lines or anything like that. Like I said in the beginning, we have to do all of our cultural burning within reserve boundary, even though we have a traditional territory. We can't burn outside of the reserve boundary without jumping through all the government's hoops. And a lot of us aren't educated on how to do that. And then you have to pay money to get a consultant to come in and work with your band. And you have to negotiate with the government. And all of a sudden, we're 5 years down the road, and maybe a wildfire's already come through and burnt that area for us, and kind of, I call it left it moonscaped, because it was an uncontrolled burn. So
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge for a lot of nations. Can you talk some more about the consequences of removing fire from the landscape?
I didn't understand it probably till after Elephant Hill, because I'd never been exposed to wildfire. My fire knowledge at that time was burning hay fields, burning your leaves in the yard. I understood plants, and I understood succession, but I didn't understand natural succession, because all the succession I've seen had been restarted by like logging or road development. Natural succession, the first thing I noticed was that it brought back plants that I'd never seen before. And I was probably in cultural heritage for about 5 years at that point. And then I'd also started playing around with collecting medicinal plants. And just out of curiosity, I compared Arnica harvested from within a burn to outside of a burn. It was a lot more medicinal. Like you could feel it working a lot faster, it worked longer. So that to me said that these burns were doing something good. They were restarting the succession, the whole story all over again.
It's really interesting to hear about how a fire that impacted your community has like brought this knowledge back to you about like learning how plants react to fire and like some of the positive things that can come out of a fire despite how negatively they can impact a community. Can you share how Indigenous peoples have used fire as a tool for land stewardship and anything that you might have learned since you've been expanding your knowledge about cultural burning?
It helped the understory of the trees, because I think a lot of our forests are really far from what they used to be, with windfall, thickness of the canopy, and how dense the trees are. I don't think that's how it used to be. Like, I don't think we were able to walk through it like it was a park in the past, but I've done one study on following traditionally used trails in the north section of our territory. And of course, there was water, there was height of land, but you also went through various kinds of tree stands and meadows and stuff like that. And I started to think they probably would have used fire to, one, keep these meadows producing traditional plants, and also push back the trees from encroaching on the meadows. Like, just looking out the window there, you can see the trees are really creeping down the hill, and I don't think that would have been there in the past. And there's also a section of trees that's missing now that maybe has become overgrown. So
Were there people in your nation who kept cultural burning practices alive even when fire use was discouraged?
yeah, I think there's a handful of men that I know of that kept it going. Like I said, I've learned from my brothers, mainly Daryl Peters, and he's burned, as far as I know, my uncle's burned. But again, we all burn within reserve boundary. I have heard stories from some of my uncles where they would go out on drives with their grandfathers, and the grandfathers would just like matches out the window to start a fire, and then have to leave quickly because it was at that, and it is still illegal to do that, but they were doing it to try to burn an area for plants or for moose habitat that had become overgrown, and they're no longer seeing these plants or animals in the area, and that was the only way that they were able to do that. So I think there's the quote-unquote outlaws that kept the culture alive the only way they knew how to at that time.
That's a big power of resistance that has helped keep your territory cleansed through fire. You talked a little bit about like how Smokey the Bear and that kind of thought process around fire has shaped the relationship with fire. Can you share a bit more about how you feel about how the past has transformed?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of negativity toward large scale burning, that people were afraid of it. And then also, my own opinion, it would have been industry. They didn't want the trees to be burnt for harvest, like for logging and stuff like that. And people just didn't understand. And maybe now they're starting to understand because we had the mountain pine beetle infestation. And I caught the tail end of that when I first started with Skeetchestn Natural Resources. And you see the remnants of it when you drive up in the highlands where there's these massive openings of pine that had to be logged because of the pine beetle. Now we deal with like tussock moth and Douglas fir beetle, which maybe is preventable with burning. I don't know though. And there's noxious weeds taking out our plant communities, and that probably could be something managed by fire. I don't know at the point some of it is now. Maybe it's a whole different process, but
Can you share more about what your current work and connection to fire looks like?
currently I have taken a break from being on fire. I think it was 2021 when Sparks Lake and Tremont were here, and that was a pretty traumatic fire season for a lot of us. I had to step back and work on my relationship with fire because there was a lot of negative things that had happened that season. I stepped back as far as I wasn't letting myself go on cultural burns because even as much as the smoke was triggering some PTSD, but I've stayed sitting at fire tables to share knowledge mainly on the plants because my job title is Cultural Heritage Team Lead, and we focus on plants, water, landforms, animals. So, kind of everything around archaeology. And I've had to work inside of burns since Tremont and Sparks Lake. And that's kind of helped me start reconnecting back with fire because, as devastated as our territory got that year, I've been able to be out there and see the plants returning, the animals coming back. I've also seen the bad sides like the landslides and the noxious weeds, but just being able to see the land start repairing itself has helped a lot. And I am getting a little bit more anxious to jump back out on a controlled burn. We've been working with BC Wildfire to plant some controlled burns actually outside of the reserve. They're taking direction from us. They've really built somewhat of a relationship with us. So that's another good step toward getting back at it. But also with Skeetchestn's Wildfire initial attack crew, that was kind of somewhat my role loosely back before it was developed. They've really taken up the reins on the wildfire and the territory, but they're properly trained for that. Back then we were just kind of jumping out on it and putting the fire out, and then they would get put out, but we probably weren't doing it in the right way.
You talked a bit about how your territory was impacted by wildfires. Can you share more about how the nation has been impacted?
Well, the Schwab Nation, like I don't know any numbers, but I can imagine how much of it is burnt now with the super fires we've been having, or I can't remember what they call them, just like the monster fires we've been having. You look at Nisconlith, Squilax, Skeetchestn, Bonaparte, how our lands have all been just kind of crisped. Skeetchestn, I can't remember, but it's definitely over 75% burned since Elephant Hill. And we lost all of that within, 4 or 5 years or so, something like that. And we've kind of just had to sit back and wait for it to regrow. And then there's also right after the fire a rush of salvage harvest. So then we lose that burnt timber. I definitely push for more studies in that area that, not all the burnt timber needs to be cut down and taken off the land right away. I think it still does play some roles in providing shade or even maybe helping stop landslides. Also, I'm not as educated in that. I've just been traditionally trained, not gone through all kinds of college and university to get to where I'm at. I was raised with Kia, so I pack that traditional knowledge, and that's kind of where my background is also. Just wanted to say that while I'm saying all this, I don't fully understand all of it, but I just kind of limp along and learn the best I can. And I know our community's voices aren't being heard during these fires. I've seen it here in Skeetchestn, how they will listen to us, but then turn around and do something exactly opposite. When we do have people in community that have so much knowledge of fire, just from that, being raised doing cultural burning, being raised on the land, being out there hunting and understanding how the air move or the wind moves, where the water is, where the roads are. I think they're starting to come around slowly, but I really wish the nation as a whole would come together and stand together so that our voice is heard a lot more. Because maybe if we had done that a long time ago, we wouldn't have these massive losses of our land where we can't go out and harvest and collect on for the first 2-3 years.
Yeah, that's definitely a huge thing. As we were discussing before the podcast, I'm also from the Squamish Nation up north, and there's definitely been an impact on traditional territory and our food sovereignty in the past few years. Can you share some ongoing projects or movements that inspire you to continue working against these Western systems to hopefully maintain and revitalize your traditional territory?
I think part of it is I'm stubborn, and part of it is my healing. I witnessed some pretty horrible stuff out on the fires, and I got very angry, and there probably wasn't rational thoughts or sleep deprivation, but one thing I remember telling some of the firefighters is that they burnt out my medicine bowl. I try to collect medicinal plants. I've started moving into food for the elders because a lot of them aren't able to get out on the land. So every Christmas I try to give them a bundle from Skeetchestn Natural Resources just so that they can remember that. That became so much harder after the wildfires. But it also fueled me to figure out how can I keep this program going. Because I see how much it really helps the elders when they get, a little jar of Arnica salve or some kind of tea like a trapper's tea. It really rejuvenates them, and then they share that information more openly with the youth, because there are people I find in kind of my age group in the 30-year-olds that we're trying really hard to reconnect, and we're running into those walls where people don't want to share, maybe because of their past and residential school trauma or who knows, but giving them those little tastes of things off the land they want to share more openly and guide us. So that's one thing that really fuels me. And another thing is that I do see changes in BC Wildfire. I can't say the whole government, but within BC Wildfire I am seeing changes. We've seen some of the higher ups move on, and the new people replacing seem to have more understanding of First Nations and wanting to work more with us. So I have to get over my angry feelings toward who was in their seat before and try to build a relationship so that hopefully my nephew's generation, they don't have to go through the trauma I went through on the fire line. Because I think no matter what, First Nations are always going to chase fire. if it's with BC Wildfire or a contract crew, or maybe working within their own reserves, hopefully on an initial attack crew. We got to keep that alive and somehow buffer them from what I had to go through on the line.
That's really interesting to hear how like your medicine has helped bridge a connect from like the older generation to like sharing knowledge with the younger generation. You talked a little bit about how your grandmother or Kia shared knowledge with you about how the women would run the cultural burning. Can you share what roles you've seen Indigenous women play in revitalizing fire stewardship?
Yeah, I've met some really strong women, First Nations women, Indigenous women, going to like fire conferences and stuff like that. Like I see a real drive in the women to try to take that role back. So I feel like a lot of us have talked to our kias or aunties about how it used to be. And we're all kind of figuring out, like, the one memory kia had is that the women would go out in November and do a light burn on thin snow to help get the root plants ready for the spring. But I also think Indigenous women are really just taking up all roles. If it was a man's role or a woman's role, like it seems like we've really become empowered. Maybe that's just that I'm getting older and I'm moving up into these more connected women, but it's been a real learning curve for me, going from learning from like my brothers to learning from these women that share a lot more openly, and they're like a girl's girl. They want to empower you and get you out there. Like I've learned a lot from Tiffany Traverse, and she was with BC Wildfire and has since left. And she's on the Salish Firekeepers board now. And just how openly she is to wanting to help me move further in my burning career has really helped. Like anytime, because it is hard for a woman in any fire still to get the respect, I find. I still hide a lot behind my brother Daryl. I'll always follow his lead. I respect that he has a traditional knowledge bank that's way bigger than mine, so I just kind of follow and do what he tells me to do. But just like working alongside some of the women, they're kind of like, no, just get out there and trust your instinct, and they'll correct you in a nice way and share how you did it wrong. And they're always inviting you to burns in their territory. Or I didn't get to attend, but I was invited to a burn across in the United States, but wasn't able to get the funds to go down there. But again, that was all led by women.
That's really exciting to hear how women have been inviting you and encouraging you in this space. Can you share about like other partnerships that have helped support Indigenous-led fire stewardship?
Well, I think like with FNESS, I worked with their cultural burning team quite a bit and just working at conferences and stuff like that. Vic Upshaw, worked a lot with him. I actually met him on Elephant Hill. And for a long time, I always said he was the only red shirt that I would trust. I trust more now, but FNESS definitely was one. The new relationship that Travis with the Skeetchestn initial attack crew, he's built a really good relationship with BC Wildfire, which is really great to see. I can't say I had much of a relationship with them after the Tremont fire, but they seem to be coming to the cultural heritage table more with like their heart in their hand. They more want to learn from First Nations and why these plants are important to us and how they can help prevent the loss that we've had, and maybe also help the growth of these plants and our culture. So, and they're usually women that are coming to the table now, and they want to learn and stand there with us and do the burn with us. So.
You talked about like the older generation starting to share their knowledge with the youth. With that knowledge, what role do you see youth or the next generation playing?
I think they have a huge role and they don't understand it yet. Like, I'm in my 30s now and I'm still learning. And I'm kind of at a point where I'm having to bridge the gap because some of the younger youth weren't raised in the ways of respect, I guess. But there's some you can see they want to learn, but they just don't understand, how to approach the elders, how to sit there and learn by watching, or, just even go for a tea or a coffee and just talk to the elders. There's a disconnect there. But I do see, like, my sisters, we all want to learn, we want to reconnect, we want to learn the language, we want to learn about beading or basket weaving. And we're able to go to Arnica and learn from her. And my brother's really raised his sons in a way of respect where they can go to Kia and learn a lot. And they're kind of passing it on to their friends because they're all in there. I think the one's going into grade 1 and one's getting ready to graduate. There's 4 boys. So they're kind of sharing that with all their friends. And you see those kids are starting to get interested. But a lot of kids now can't just sit that long and they want everything instant. But it's coming. And I get worried about the elders moving on in their journeys and the amount of information we're going to lose. So I'm hoping that some more people start kind of picking up the slack and learning. Like, even as much as funerals. We have so many people passing away. And a lot of us sit there and we're like, oh, well, what is the actual practices for funerals? And we don't know because we were those little kids not long ago and we were too busy running off and playing at the playground, or, just not wanting to learn. Now we're like, oh no, what do we do? So I do see that kind of scare right now.
Yeah, it's definitely hard with like all of the changes in society to have youth connect with their culture and their community. Can you share a bit about what gives you hope for the future of cultural burning?
I'm still reconnecting to have a healthy relationship with fire. And I think a lot of the people in the community are, like, a lot of us see smoke and we jump back to that fear of, sparks like Tremont, Elephant Hill, Alley Lake. But I do understand that we need to speak louder so that we can push for more cultural burns, because just being out on the land like 3 days a week and then on weekends for my own time, I do see that there is a need for cultural burns even now. Like, the fires were only a handful of years ago, but just to clean up there's always that burst of growth right after a fire. Now it's kind of died off and dried up, and it's sitting there waiting to be made into another monster fire that'll come through and burn again. And I think if we were still able to use fire to clean up the land, we could prevent a lot of that moving forward. Because the way I always told people is it just was Mother Earth restarting and taking control of what we haven't been able to do, and that's in the form of these monster fires. She had to go clean herself up. And now we should be fighting to help her stay clean and take care of what she's done. Like, one thing during Sparks Lake I thought was really interesting is none of Skeetchestn's buildings burned. We have a handful of cabins, and Sparks Lake burnt a nearby community down, and it burnt around the cabins. You can go up and you can see the footings of the cabins are actually charred, and they're log cabins, but they didn't burn down. There's a porta potty at the cabins. It was melted over, warped, and somehow these cabins didn't. All the trees inside inside the camping area had been burnt black, but our buildings didn't. And I probably there's some scientific reason they didn't. I tied it to a spiritual that we were doing ceremony during, and we were making offerings to the fire and stuff like that. But I think we need to, again, fight for our rights to burn to prevent another fire like that again.
It's really powerful how like your community was able to not have a direct impact from fire, and like as you said, your spiritual reasons for like protecting the cabin and like making offerings and just seeing how Mother Earth cleanses herself and like protects those that protect her. If you could change one thing about how fire is seen or used in the future, what would it be?
The fear, like just general fear, but also a proper respect. There is times when doing a cultural burn, you do get scared, but if you're doing it right, you have to respect that fear. I think that fear also comes from us not being used of seeing this kind of stuff, and seeing the speed fire can work at. I still get tight on the inside when I'm out doing a burn on a hayfield, and all of a sudden there comes a wind, and then there's just huge flames, and like, oh, there it goes. But then I have to kind of ground myself to remember, well, we've put in burn guards. Where is it going to go? Just let her clean herself. I think we need to kind of get rid of the fear of taking youth out on these burns. I definitely get a little scared when there's kids running around, but like my brother Daryl Peters, he's had his kids out doing burns since they were just little, and they respect fire. They burn right beside us now, or ahead of us even. And I think us as knowledge keepers, we need to just, kind of let that happen. Because a lot of people now are like, oh, kid's going to get cut. Well, it's going to happen, but, we got to get them out off of their games and outside and doing this kind of stuff so they can start understanding it, doing it properly, and start enjoying it. Because if we always hold them back, they're always going to have that fear of it. And then that knowledge will end up just ending with us.
Yeah, fear is definitely a huge thing, but as you said, like, there's a healthy amount of fear, and like it comes with respect for the fire and what it can do. How can Indigenous knowledge inform today's wildfire prevention and mitigation strategies?
One, we got to learn how to use our voice properly. A lot of us are angry. And when you talk out of anger, you're not going to get respected on the other side of the table. A lot of us have to acknowledge that we actually have the knowledge, like have that confidence to use our voice. And I think if we did that and the government was willing to hear us, there would be a better understanding of that we understand the land pretty well. A lot of my brothers and that, they're still out hunting all the time. So like I've said before, they understand how the wind moves in our territory in the valleys on a certain hill system. One thing that was taught to me, and I never even thought of, is that fire chases water. So in like the daytime, the heat will move up away from the water, and then in the night it's always going to switch back and run back to its nearest water body. So that alone was able to give me pointers on how to do fire watch, because that was my role on the large fires. I'm not a firefighter. I watch it, I study it, I track its boundary. I'm taking spatial data, helping making calls for the community. I very rarely actually fight fire. And that was back to me romanticizing fire, though. I grew really connected to like Sparks Like Fire. I understood what she was doing and that she had to clean. That's a whole other story, though.
It's really interesting to like hear you talk about your relationship with fire and like get deeper into the questions. You talked a bit about some of your partners and how they've supported you. How can other non-Indigenous allies and organizations support Indigenous-led fire stewardship?
Coming to the table, like not with your heart in your hand, not being bashful, but being understanding. Not a lot of us go as far as getting degrees or masters. I see it more often now in like our generation and younger, but there's people that maybe they didn't complete their grade 12 or even high school, but they have so much more knowledge and they aren't completely respected at a table because we don't have letters behind our names. But these are the people that have actually lived, like literally lived out on the land. They grew up on the back of a horse. They grew up hiking. They grew up doing something out there with the grandparents that are now gone. And we have to recognize that knowledge as its own sort of degree. And also understanding that I have no other words for it. Not a lot of us like to be the token Indian. I don't like sitting at a table and they're like, oh, well, you're from Skeetchestn. You have all this traditional knowledge. It's knowledge I've worked for my whole life to have. And I'm not just going to, throw it out there on the table just because it's going to better the program. Like I need those relationships built. I need you to walk on the land with me. I need to see you as a friend and not a business partner. There has to be that general understanding on all parts how we can work together.
Yeah, I definitely agree about the education piece. My dad didn't graduate high school and didn't complete his GED, but he's the person that taught me everything I know about fire. And I feel like as I continue to learn about fire, I just think back to some conversations that I had with him, and like there's pieces that I'm still putting together from those conversations and like learning from them as I remember. And yeah, the token Indian thing is definitely a huge factor. We want a relationship. We don't just want to share knowledge for business reasons or colonial relationships. To finish this off, what advice would you give to young Indigenous women interested in this work?
Get in there. Just, I snuck onto Elephant Hill because they needed someone to run an iPad, and chief and council just wanted to go out and see where the fire was. None of them knew how to run an iPad. They didn't know how to run a Venza. And I held on to that position for the rest of that fire. You weren't going to kick me off. I think don't be afraid to let your voice be heard in a respectful way. Don't go in and act like you're top dog, you know everything. You still got to be respectful, but be heard. Don't be afraid to get in there with the guys. We still, as people wanting to get that knowledge handed down to us, have to respect that, our elders believe in gender roles. So I know myself, I walk that line. It's a very fine line. When people aren't looking, I'm probably going to do stuff the guys are doing, but I have to understand that, a male elder might not want to share the same information with me as they do share with one of my brothers. And the same with female. And we just have to be respectful of that part of the learning process. And the way I got around is I learned from my brothers. But, I want to see more women out there. I want to see more women burning. And I think it's the best thing is I can say is just get out there, get learning, be proud, and have a thick skin. A lot of things have changed since way back in the day when women ran the burns. And it's something that we'll have to fight for to get back. And the best way I can say to do it is go about it a respectful way. Like you don't want to buffalo your way in there and lose that respect from your brothers, your uncles, but work your way up the ladder. And don't be afraid to get dirty. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun too. I love my relationship with fire in the end. And I understand that I've disconnected from it a lot, but that isn't because of what the fire did. It's who handled the fire and how they did it that I had to step back and really take a moment. But I think I'm ready to get back out there, and hopefully it's beside more women and girls.
Ashley, Darlene, Samantha. 3 women. 3 paths that converge on this shared truth. Fire is knowledge, fire is care, fire is kin. Their stories ask us to listen closely, to act respectfully, and to remember that good fire is not a relic of the past, it's a promise for the future. To learn more about Indigenous-led fire stewardship and what you can do in your own community, visit firesmartbc.ca. Thanks for listening.